Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. America's political culture is coming apart. The rhetoric is rapidly getting harsher, in case you haven't noticed. It's getting more venomous. And most ominously, it is becoming more racialized. Riots over race and politics were virtually unheard of 10 years ago in this country. Sadly, now they are common. We're living in a scary time, and people know it. A new Fox poll found that 81% of voters think the bonds that hold this country together are weakening. Just a decade ago, people joked about letting states secede from the Union or splitting the country into two along political lines. None of that sounds very funny anymore, or even far-fetched at this point. So at a volatile moment like this, the last thing this country needs is more demagoguery, especially racial demagoguery, which always leaves the deepest and longest-lasting wounds. On the other hand, whipping people into a frenzy of fear and rage is a guaranteed ratings bonanza, and CNN can never resist that. Watch how that network takes the controversy over the national anthem at football games and turns it into a terrifying story about race hatred.
If anyone actually believes this is about the flag, then you must believe Rosa Parks' protest was about a bus. Think about that.
When he says, he was really telling the owners, like the owners or the plantation owners and the guys playing the league, you know, they're on the plantation, you can't say anything. And so the thing has really escalated.
It does sound a little bit, and obviously you can come at me on Twitter about this, like he's saying control your dog. Control your dog to the owners. And now he says they're fearful of the players. So he is setting up the ugliest kind of tension that you can. And I know when you say control your dog, it's got a lot of racial overtones to it. So does this situation. Yeah. I don't know how you can look at it and not see how it's racial.
Dogs? Who said anything about dogs? Nobody did, but it doesn't matter. The image is horrifying, and that's the point. You can't turn away from that. Now, do you hate and fear your neighbor a little more by the end of that segment? Of course you do. Imagine millions of people watching that kind of thing all day long. What would happen to the country? We're finding out now. Monique Presley is an attorney. She's a Democratic political commentator, and she joins us tonight. Thanks a lot, Monique, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess what bothers me is, I think it's important to have honest conversations about race, but I think you should be responsible because it has the capacity to really scare people and really hurt people and hurt the country. And so when you see a journalist on another network basically make up a quote and say, he's saying control your dogs, which nobody has ever said, and then comment upon this imaginary quote and go off on this, well, it's a racial thing. If I'm watching that with half, asleep, I'm terrified by the end. They shouldn't do that to people.
And perhaps you would be terrified at the end, but I'm really not interested in how Chris Cuomo's analogy may terrify people. The issue is why there are protests in the first place and the people who are living terrified every day just walking down the street. So if you look at how we got here because African American men are disproportionately stopped, disproportionately searched, disproportionately arrested, and disproportionately killed per capita in this country.
That is true.
And one brave man decided to first sit and then take a knee.
Okay.
The escalation didn't come into what I guess you're now calling terror. I'm not really hearing about, frankly, Tucker, a lot of people being afraid because of
let me just acknowledge that I think a lot of what you say is valid, reasonable, something that we can talk about in debate. But what I really object to, and what I think is hurting the country, is the demagoguery in the way that it's discussed and described on other channels, particularly on CNN. So, for example, what you just said, that African American men are more likely to be stopped and shot, that is absolutely true. But it's a nuanced question, actually. Black men are more likely to be shot by African American cops than by white cops. I'm not sure that proves anything, but it certainly detracts from the storyline CNN is pushing. And so when you're going to tell a story, you have to tell the whole story, or else what you're doing is you're pushing a false story designed to scare the crap out of people, and that's what they're doing.
Right, but even in what you just said, that was incorrect, because where the numbers are concerned, when you're talking about more likely, you're talking about statistics into the future. But when you look at the numbers of the race of police officers who have actually killed African American males, there have been more white officers to do it than black ones.
Right now.
So
and look,
it's not a statistical issue.
actually, what I said is true. And I'm not drawing a massive conclusion from it other than this stuff is super complicated, okay? So a lot of these cities in which this is taking place are run by African Americans, a majority African American police departments. It doesn't mean there's not racism. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just saying add the context and don't start using dog analogies, which immediately evoke pictures of Alabama 1955 and Bull Connor and all the rest, which are not designed to inform people or elucidate. They're designed to terrify and horrify people, and that's bad for the country.
I'm not sure who they're designed to terrify and horrify, though. I keep hearing you say that, and I heard in the intro where you kept saying it's scary, it's terrifying, it's horrifying. But the African Americans were already terrified. They're terrified of law enforcement. They're terrified that the very flag that we revere and adhere to, the very flag that symbolizes the best of freedom in this country, is the same symbol that's now being used to represent race superiority, the same symbol that's now being used to represent things that are not
which I
freedom.
think, I really hope is not a majority opinion in any community, because I think it's a crackpot with respect theory. But let me give you a specific example of why this coverage has been irresponsible. Spike Lee was up there, you saw on CNN.
And
now,
he's not a CNN commentator. He's an
not
individual,
no, but
private
he's also
businessman,
he's also
owner,
a prolific
African-American
conspiracy
man.
nut. No, he's a conspiracy nut.
Well, and that would be an opinion,
well, no,
especially the nut part.
Well, I'll give you an example, because I was there. 2006, Spike Lee said to me on television that the levees in New Orleans during Katrina were blown up in order to hurt black people. Now, I don't think he was there during Katrina. I was. As a factual matter, that didn't happen. That's crazier than anything, I don't know, Alex Jones has ever said. So you let that guy on your air.
Crazier than anything President Trump has ever said.
Look, my only point is,
this country
if
likes
you have
conspiracy nuts right now. Maybe he'll be our next president.
Maybe that's the problem. So if you have a guy like that on who said something racially inflammatory and untrue, you should push back a little bit when he theorizes about how this is about the plantation mentality on the basis of no evidence. If you're a journalist, you got to say, whoa, can you prove that?
He used an analogy, and using an analogy that actually came to the minds of many people in African American communities and in Caucasian communities and in Latino or brown communities.
Right.
When our president, the president of this country, referred to African American citizens, tax-paying citizens who are gainfully employed, making good money in this country in the NFL as professional athletes, when he referred to them in the manner he did as sons of bitches and said that the owners ought to get those sons of bitches out of there. Just drag them out of there. That language makes it seem like these owners have a proprietary interest in the bodies of these African American athletes.
I don't know what
such
school
that
you went
they
to.
can be.
Don't give me
I went
that
to Howard
nonsense.
University
Look,
School of Law. Before that, I went to St. Mary's University. Proud of it. Right.
Look,
he's saying that they should be dragged out of there for a peaceful protest. The next time they get down on their knees in their peaceful, lawful protest, those SOBs ought to be dragged out of there.
That's his opinion.
Really, as the president of the United States. Some of these
guys, hold on.
About another citizen.
Can I slow you down? Can I slow you down in your speech for 1 second? You don't like what the president said.
Well,
but I was
nobody
there.
likes
but
what
I
he
was
said.
there.
You don't like what he said, do you?
I absolutely agree that it's divisive and offensive to attack the flag. If you've got a problem with the police,
did you think that his language was divisive and offensive?
I think that there is nothing about what he said that was explicitly racial, and I think it is immoral for you and others to pretend that you know what he was thinking when you don't.
I asked if you liked it or if it was offensive.
It's not offensive to me to have him say
you weren't the SOB in question.
Okay, but look, he called them SOBs. Maybe he should have done that. But the point remains, it's not a racial attack. There are white players down on one knee as well. As you know, you're ignoring that because it doesn't bolster the divisive argument you're seeking to make.
The issue that they're protesting, and the majority of the ones who are doing it in the NFL in general,
know that. They have issued no statement. You know nothing about that because they've
issued no statement about what?
About what it's about.
Okay.
The majority of players have issued no statement. Don't pretend you know because you don't.
I wasn't pretending.
Yes,
what I was saying is that the National Players Association issued a statement about
Right.
it saying what they were protesting. So they represent all of the players. And then specific players, such as Colin Kaepernick, who
Right.
stood
Got
out
it.
first, was
Look, here's the
protesting
point. Look, you
racial
can disagree
injustice
with
in
how
this country.
people treat the flag without being a racist. And
Well,
you're not
and it's
allowing
constitutional,
room for that.
right?
No one
It's
is contesting.
constitutional
No one's
to denigrate the
contesting
flag.
that.
You have
I'm
a
saying you're
constitutional
inserting,
right to do it.
You are inserting a racial angle where none necessarily exists, and it's irresponsible. And
If
CNN is doing it as well.
I'm inserting
Yes,
it,
you
then I'm
are.
inserting it because it's obvious to any eyes that aren't rose-colored. So it's
That's,
just
you know,
a
that's
part,
your opinion,
the
but it's
only
like a
way that we can
news
speak
organization. But
truth-
hold on, you
well, I
concede
don't work for
this.
CNN, so I can't
But do you
defend
think
them. But I think that what
hold
was
on, okay.
said on this issue was true.
Do you think someone who gets up as a reporter and claims to be a conveyor of the news ought to be speculating with no evidence about the opinions or attitudes or deepest beliefs of a figure in the news? Do you think we should just make up something and say this is what he meant when we don't know that?
Well, here's
Why
the
would
thing.
you do that?
When you just said that Spike Lee was a conspiracy nut,
Because he told me a conspiracy
what
nut
he
theory
said
to my face.
you was what he believed to be true, and you, as a journalist, commented on it and gave your own opinion about what he
No,
said.
it's not my opinion. It's
So,
a factual statement. The levees were not
conspiracy
blown
nut
up.
isn't really a factual assertion.
Actually, it is. The levees were not, we know conclusively,
And
blown
nut is just
up.
a derogatory statement.
Because that's an outrageous thing to say. And the African-American run city of New Orleans determined that was untrue. It's a lie. So he shouldn't say it because it scares the hell out of people. That's all I'm saying.
Who got scared?
I did. To think my
Okay,
government would
well,
blow up a levee to kill people? Are you joking? That's
And if you're
grotesque.
feeling any amount of fear, then it may be like a smidge close to what an African-American
Right,
male is
okay.
feeling just
well, maybe it's because of
driving down the
people-
block
Maybe
or
it's like
walking
people like
down
that
the
are
street.
making it worse. That's my point. They're
All
making
right.
it worse. Monique, thank you.
Thank you for having me.